Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Educational AD Podcast. We're going to be right back with this week's guest, but as always, we're going to give a shout out to our sponsors. Now, these are companies that I used as an AD. For years, I used them. They're great companies. That's why they're sponsors. And I really recommend that you check them out. So take 3 minutes, listen to our shout outs, then listen to our interview, and then go and visit these sponsors. I'm telling you, you're going to be glad you did. Here we go. Hey, we want to say thanks to our good friends at Sideline Interactive Indoor Score Tables. Go to their website. You can schedule a live web demo to see their products in action. You've heard me say many times, probably one of the best purchases I ever made was our Sideline Interactive Indoor Score Table. Go to sidelineinteractive.com for more information. We also want to thank Huddle. As a football coach, I used Huddle for years. As an AD, I made sure we were a Huddle school, and our coaches, our student athletes, even our parents just love the platform. Go to huddle.com. Join the 8 million users. Turn your school into a Huddle school. We want to say thanks to Hometown. Hometown is changing the game for schools and organizations with tools like digital ticketing, athletic website construction, fee-free fundraising, and a whole lot more. Whether you're an AD or a principal, even a head coach, Hometown's going to show you how to save time, how to raise more money, and how to bring your community together. That's hometown.com. We also want to say thanks to Vital Signs Wall of Fame. If you're looking for a really cool way to display your school record boards for all the teams, for all the different events, or your school's Hall of Fame, go to their website, check out their interactive touchscreen video consoles. You put one of these units in your gym lobby or main school hallway, it's going to be a magnet for kids, for coaches. How about sponsors? Go to vitalsignswalloffame.com. Check out their products today. We want to thank Gipper. Go to gipper.com and let their team turn you into a social media marketing guru. Whether you're looking for solutions for the school or just your athletic department, the team at Gipper is going to have you up and running in no time. Graphics for social media posts, newsletters, you name it, they will do it. And it's so easy, even I can do it. Go to gipper.com for more information. That's gipper.com. We want to thank Home Campus. If you schedule, if you have roster management, if you do athletic clearance and eligibility, Home Campus is a game changer. Just go to homecampus.com. Tell them you heard about it on the podcast. That's homecampus.com. We want to thank Ohio University and their online masters in athletic administration. My assistant athletic director, along with thousands of others, got his master's through the Ohio program, and while they were completing their degree, they also completed 11 NIAAA leadership training courses at no extra charge. Check out Ohio University and their online masters in athletic administration. We also want to say thank you to Snap Raise. Have you ever spent weeks and weeks with a fundraiser and been disappointed with the results? Those days are over. Go to Snap Raise. We used it at our school and had tremendous success, and so will you. Check out all their other great platforms. But if you're looking for a fundraiser, you just found it, and it's Snap Raise. And let's say thanks to Athletic Surveys. If you're not using a survey to take the pulse of your parents, your student athletes, you're really missing out on a great opportunity. We use surveys in my school for just about everything, and the information that came back almost always over the top positive. We still got to hear from those squeaky wheel parents, but the surveys allowed us to hear their concerns, typically address them and keep them from turning into something big. But having all of that positive feedback, that positive data, it's incredibly valuable, especially when you're visiting with your principal, sometimes even your school board. Go to athleticsurveys.com. They're going to create a custom survey that's going to help you take your athletic program from good to great. That's Athletic Surveys, and don't forget to tell them about the podcast. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Educational AD Podcast. If you listen to podcasts that are put out by athletic directors, you have to have the off-duty ADs, at the top of your list. They've been doing it longer than anybody. And we've got the creator, maybe the co-creator, Dr. Mark Rerick, with us today. He was actually on season 2 of the podcast, of our podcast. He and his group, I'm going to let him talk about them when we get going here, continue to record, many years after they started this thing. If you're new to this arena, just a little bit about Mark. He's currently an assistant professor at the University of North Dakota in their sport leadership and athletic administration and coaching degree programs. That's PhD and other degrees. Longtime high school AD and coach, tremendous resume. He's active at the state and the national level. He's the chair for the NIAAA Publications Committee. He's also on the national teaching faculty for a number of courses. And as I said, he's the creator, co-creator, and host of the Off Duty ADs podcast. Dr. Mark Rerick, welcome back to the Educational
Hey,
AD
Jake.
podcast.
Thanks for having me back. Appreciate it.
Well, you and I, had a very nice talk before we hit the record button. Um, I know obviously you're not new to podcasts, but sometimes we get some new listeners, and I always like to let them have a chance to get to know our guests. So, as I like to say, give us your life story in 2 minutes. Where were you born, where you grew up. Just take us up through your own college days, and then we'll take a break. But what's the Mark Rerick origin story?
Actually, I've kind of been in this exact same world for my whole life. I grew up in a tiny little town in North Dakota. My parents had both gotten teaching jobs in that tiny little town a month before my twin brother and I were born. My dad was a year-round four-sport coach. My mom was a teacher. And so, really from about the time that my twin brother and I were able to walk, we've been hanging out with dad at practices. And one of the benefits of growing up in a tiny little town, the K-12 building was one building. And so, my mom taught kindergarten. My dad taught high school math. And so, from the time that we were in kindergarten and beyond, the school day would finish on the elementary side, and my brother and I would walk over to the high school side and find dad and join him at practice. And so, from 6 years old on, we're moving cones and holding dummies and filling water and doing all those things. And then, all the regular coach's kid job, by junior high, I was the varsity's official stat kid on the sideline, and my brother was recording. Right, my brother's up in the crow's nest recording the games. So did all that, and finished high school, and then I went to a small NAI school here in North Dakota, and had the opportunity to play multiple sports at that school. Finished with a teaching degree in English and physical education, coaching minor, and I've been blessed to be in the world of sports ever since. And so, I've talked about how rewarding that is than to go from, really being born into a family where, dad is coaching 12 months out of the year and you go sport to sport to sport to sport, and to have the opportunity to literally spend every day of my life working around sports in one way or another. And now to finally be kind of on the upper end of that educational piece, and to be running our sport leadership doctorate program, and really to still be working with people who want to be in that space, who are running sports.
Well, again, I just love to hear the stories. I've heard yours, before, but I just, it brings back a ton of memories for me. My mom and dad were not teachers. They weren't coaches. For whatever reason, I wanted to do sports as a kid, whether it was backyard football or driveway basketball, and they supported me. My own kids, they had that same situation you did. Mom and dad were teachers and coaches. My wife's a Hall of Fame cross country and track coach. And so they grew up in that arena. And I think they had a pretty good time. They all did sports. They all competed at the college level, but none of them went into education. I think they maybe saw some of the challenges that our generation was going through, with teaching and all that, and decided they wanted to do other things. And they're doing great. But I just always wondered, for people who do grow up as you did you always know that you were going to be a coach? I mean, it was just, you knew it in your heart, or did that come, oh gosh, I could do this too at some point?
That's a really good question. As you were talking about that, I was just thinking back. I'm one of four, and of the four of us, two of us went into the K-12 world. and we both became administrators later. My little brother actually just finished his doctorate also, and so he's a district level director in a different school district. My younger sister is an academic advisor for the athletic department at South Dakota State University, so she works in the education space. And then ironically, it's my twin brother is the only one of us four that doesn't work in education, but he's still coaching, right? And so he has a real job in the private sector. Did I know that I wanted to do that? I don't know. It's a tough question. Really up until about my senior year of high school, I was pretty sure I was going to go into pharmacy. My job in town, my small town job, I worked at the drugstore. Think like CVS on a much smaller scale, right? I mean that was my job, and the owner of our small town drugstore was the pharmacist. And so, I was able to kind of shadow him and learn. And I had thought a lot about going into to pharmacy. And to be honest with you, Jake, I'm not quite sure at what point I stopped doing that. Um, when it came time to start thinking about where to go to school and you know, just talking to multiple coaches about different sports at different schools. And I think just by chance, the decision kind of came down to two schools that excel in education. And I don't know if that was a tipping point or not. The school I ended up going to has a nationally recognized teacher preparation program. And so it was kind of a natural fit to go there. I've always enjoyed the leadership part. I've always enjoyed the teaching part. It's always kind of come naturally to me. Fits really well into the classroom setting. And so it's an interesting question. I don't know if it's as easy as saying, yes or no. I mean, it wasn't. Like I said, I kicked around, 100 ideas and I thought about athletic training. And like I said, pharmacy was kind of the last one until all of a sudden I was at a teacher prep school majoring in education and never looked back. I've never thought twice about getting out of the profession. I've looked at various things to do within the profession. And I've been a teacher and administrator and
Right.
now, back to teaching and, I kicked around early in my career, do I want to do the college coaching route,
Mhm.
but I mean, all related to teaching in one shape, one way, shape or form. And I love doing it. I mean, even now at the university level, where I get to go walk into a bunch of kids, I call them kids, right? But a bunch of college students, some of whom are engaged, many of whom are not. But I still just love it, right? I love walking into that classroom and having that kind of influence.
Boy, and again, it just fascinates me the paths that our guests, all of our guests take. We all do. I remember, my dad was a contractor, and my brothers and we got to work for him on weekends and summers. And I knew I didn't want to work for a living. So, hey, I go to college, I can still play sports. This is great. And as I joke many times, injuries and a lack of talent kept me out of the NFL. I'm going, well, geez, I can coach. Well, you have to teach. I said, well, I guess I could do that. And, 41 years later, I'm doing podcasts. But okay, I got to ask the question since you opened that door. Drugstore. Did you have any George Bailey, It's a Wonderful Life, small town drugstore moments there? I mean, not with the drunk pharmacist, but I mean, was that taking prescriptions door to door?
That was our store. In fact, one of my for context, and you'll find this funny coming from Florida. But at one point, I forget which census it was, maybe the 2000 census, when the census came out and you looked at the list of the 10 oldest counties in the nation. So by age, the county I grew up in North Dakota was in that top 10. So the other nine were all in, Florida,
In Florida.
Arizona. But the one that I live in, right? So it's a bunch of old Germans from Russia who have terrible nutritional habits, and they all live till they're 110. And so as you say I mean that was one of my jobs at the drugstore was door-to-door delivery of prescriptions. And so the calls would come in from the clinic, and we'd get all of them together, and they would just be placed in a box and That was how I started my afternoon every day was, I lived a block from the grocery store, right? The town I grew up in was about 1,100 people when I grew up there. So a tiny little town. I lived a block from the drugstore. And so that was the start of my afternoon. I'd walk home for lunch and then I'd walk back and I would clock in, right? Literally clock in. And then I would grab, I would grab that box and then I would go upstairs to the office and grab my boss's car keys and hop in his car driving around town delivering prescriptions
Wow.
to the folks who couldn't come in. And all of the old nostalgia things, right? Our the charge accounts at our store were slips of paper that were stored in a box monthly, right? And of course you knew everybody by name. And so people would come in and they'd have a cart full of stuff, because we were the target in town, right? Okay, you write it up and save the slip, put it in the box, and that was another one of our jobs at the end of the month. You tally up those slips and mail out the bill, and just all of those things, which just wonderful things to think about, right? A lot of stuff that just doesn't happen today,
Mhm.
but just very, very fortunate to have grown up in an environment like that.
Oh God, that's you got to start dictating that your memoirs. That's great opening chapters. Very cool. Thanks for sharing that stuff. Let's go and take our first break. We're visiting again with Dr. Mark Rerick, longtime AD, currently at the University of North Dakota. We're going to hear a lot more, so please stay with us. This is the Educational AD Podcast. We want to say thank you to our good friends at Sideline Interactive Indoor Score Tables and Video Boards. Go to their website and you can schedule a live web demo to see their products in action. You've heard me say many times, probably one of the best purchases I ever made was our Sideline Interactive Indoor Score Table. We use it for home games, of course, but we also use it for pep rallies, for signing ceremonies. Their products are tremendously versatile and their customer service just outstanding. Go to sidelineinteractive.com. Schedule that live web demo today. We also want to say thank you to Huddle. As a football coach, I used Huddle for years, but when I became an athletic director, I made sure that our school was a Huddle school. Our coaches, all of our coaches, just loved the tools that Huddle provided. Our student athletes loved the videos, and our parents loved the streaming, but there's a lot more. Go to huddle.com, join the 8 million users, and turn your school into a Huddle school. That's huddle.com. Welcome back, everybody, to the Educational AD Podcast. Our guest is Dr. Mark Rerick, Certified Master Athletic Administrator and Assistant Professor at the University of North Dakota. Mark, you've got your CMAA. That doesn't happen by accident. You have a tremendous background as a coach, as an athletic director, now, shaping the leaders of the next generation. How did that all start? When you graduated from college, you had decided at that point you wanted to be a teacher coach, but what were some of your stops along the way that have brought you to your current position?
Yeah, this is my career path and my career story is one of those that you hear from a lot of people where it seems like a whole lot of accidents and things that just kind of aligned and you made some changes and then here you are. And I use the word fortunate a lot, but that just applies so much to how I've been able to get to where I'm at. And so, again, grew up tiny little town, North Dakota, went to a small NAI school in North Dakota. That was the environment I knew. That was the environment that I was comfortable with. That's the environment that I wanted to be a part of. And so when I started interviewing and applying for schools, I only applied to small schools. And I had, one distinct advantage. I wanted to teach English. I had an English and PE degree, but I wanted to teach English. That's what I wanted to do. And I knew I wanted to coach. And, I had a handful of things I could coach, but football was really where I wanted to do. And, when small schools have openings for English and football, you don't often get that filled with one candidate. And I was fortunate to find three small schools, one in North Dakota, two in Minnesota, in the general area that all needed an English teacher and a football coach. And so I interviewed at all of them, got offered all of them. and chose to go to Hillsboro, North Dakota. So I went to Hillsboro. And then did the classic small town thing. I was teaching a full schedule. In my very first year, I was assistant football, assistant basketball, assistant baseball, and I was directing the one act play. By year two, I became head football. And so by year two, I'm teaching a full schedule, head football, assistant basketball, assistant baseball, and directing the one act play. Dropped the play in year three. But then, our school had an athletic director for a long time. He'd been an AD for a long, long time. And when he retired, there weren't a whole lot of folks that wanted to do that. And, we did have one other teacher who did it. He did it for 2 years and then decided he didn't want to. And then it opened back up again. And at the time it opened back up, I was almost done with my master's program. So I was going to the University of North Dakota for a master's in educational leadership to get my principal certification. And in my mind, what I wanted to do, I'd been in Hillsboro for a few years and I was going to follow that small town linear path. I was going to teach for a while, and then after teaching, I was going to be the principal at Hillsboro High School for a while. And then after being the principal, I was going to be the superintendent at Hillsboro High School until retirement. I was going to coach football the whole time,
Yep.
right? And then, at the end of 45 years, they build the statue and right and throw the parade and hand me my gold watch. And that was going to be my path. And so I'm at the end of my master's program when we need an athletic director again, and the superintendent at the time had had always kind of wanted to combine the AD role with the principal role. And it just never had the opportunity because the previous AD, who was a teacher, had been there for, 30 whatever years. And so the superintendent actually talked me into taking the AD role. I had no interest in it. I hadn't thought about it. It wasn't something that had crossed my mind. But he talked me into it in just saying, look, I know you're finishing your master's degree. I know you're going to be interested in our principal job when that opens up. Here's what I'd like you to do. Okay. And so I took the AD job. And then one of the conditions of being the AD was I had to stop coaching one sport. Right. And so I was football, basketball, baseball. And folks who are listening, this is the easiest choice in the world. Basketball coaching went out. Right. You coach basketball in North Dakota. That means you never see the sun. Okay. Because you're going to school while the sun's down. You're going home while the sun's down. Right. It's long days. It's long nights. It's long weeks. It's cold. So no more basketball. And so I took the AD job. I again, fortunate. I became an AD in a conference that is, at the time, it was loaded with guys who are now in the North Dakota IAAA Hall of Fame. And I mean, just by chance, one of our best mentors and best long-term ADs in the state, his parents lived in the apartment below mine, right? And he was in a neighboring community. And so he would come to visit his parents and he and I would be able to talk shop. And so, I go into these conference meetings and I'm surrounded by, three or four guys who are in the Hall of Fame now. And so those were my initial mentors. And so I was the AD and coach and teaching at that school for a few years. The principal job opens up and I interview for it and I don't get it. And of course I have all those immediate like, what is going on, right? I'm mad, right? I'm frustrated. I'm all of those things. I don't get it. The superintendent at the time, tells me, the thing that you're always supposed to say, everything happens for a reason, right? It's going to be okay. You're going to be fine, whatever. And so I don't get the principal job. That year, my football team ends up winning a state title. So that takes a little bit of the hurt off, right? But you reach that pinnacle. And then in the next year, I kind of just said, I've got this administrative degree. I've got to look at using it. There's no path for that here in Hillsboro. We've got to look at it. And sent out a ton of interviews across the state, all in North Dakota. Sent out a ton of applications, had a handful of interviews, got offered a handful of jobs. But the one that interested me was in a Class A school, which is the largest classification in North Dakota, but a Class A school on the other side of the state. And that job was an assistant principal / athletic director job. And the interest for me was on the principal end of it. because this is still what I'm thinking, right? The AD was just something I was doing at the school. I still think my path is principalship to superintendency. So I take this job. Again, growing up small town North Dakota, I'm a little naive at what assistant principal slash athletic director means. I know now what that means, but at the
Right.
time I was a little naive about that. But I get out there thinking, okay, well, I'm a principal who's going to do some athletic director duty jobs. And of course, you realize by week one, like, no, 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 this is an athletic director job who gets thrown a handful of principal duties. And again, surrounded by just some really, really good people. And again, I mean, talk about, I mean, these are North Dakota occurrences, but one of the ADs in my new Class A conference out west. So I'm moving across the state to a spot that I hadn't lived, surrounded by people I really don't know. But one of the other ADs in a conference school was the dad of a kid that I had coached in 11-year-old baseball when I was a college kid. Right. And so, I mean, you walk into this meeting and oh, here's a friendly face. He's currently, that's Laurel Jungling. I mean, he's currently the executive director of the NDI AAA, right? So automatic mentor. And, what I learned by, month two was that I really, really love being an AD. And that was it. I mean, that was it. And for, the 12-hour days and the 6-day weeks and all of the headaches and all of the frustrations and all of that, it was just right up my alley. And I love doing it. And I mean, that was kind of the point where I said, I think this is my path. I think sport leadership is it. It's not in the principal world. And my intention at that time was to be. I was at Dickinson High School. I was going to be in Dickinson for a few years. I really wanted a district level AD job. At that time in North Dakota, there were only three of those. And one of them was in a town in the West in Bismarck. And we knew that AD would retire at some point in the nearest future. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to make a run at that one. I'm going to put in my whatever it might be, 4, 5, 6 years in Dickinson. I'm going to wait till that Bismarck job opens, and we'll see what happens. In the meantime, in my second year out there, by accident, the Fargo AD resigns, and Todd Olson, who was in Grand Forks, applies for that and gets the Fargo job. And so, I knew I wouldn't be a strong candidate for the Fargo job because there would be, a lot of other candidates with a lot more experience and knowledge than me. But now this Grand Forks job opens up, which is 30 miles north of the school that I was first teaching and coaching in. So I'm familiar with the school. I know a lot of the coaches. I know a lot of those. So I thought, okay, well, I'll throw my name out for that one. Got hired, right? And so, now I'm moving into a district AD role. I'd been a tiny school AD for 4 years and then a slightly larger AD for 2 years. And now all of a sudden I'm one of the 3 district level ADs in the state of North Dakota in Grand Forks. And did that job for 10 years. That was a unique and challenging job. At that time in Grand Forks, there were no building level ADs, 2 high schools and 4 middles. And I worked at the district office as the district AD, but I was also the building AD for both high schools. So kind of doing, all 3 of those jobs. After 10 years of that, the superintendent here in Grand Forks decided to restructure the job. That left me on the outside looking in. But that spring perfectly coincided with the University of North Dakota deciding they wanted to start a sport leadership track to the doctorate. And I had already been asked to teach one of the initial classes as an adjunct. And then, when they saw the news about the restructuring in the school athletic department, they reached out and said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And so almost immediately, I got hired at the University of North Dakota to come teach these sport leadership classes. And I didn't realize it at the time, but when I started full time that next fall, it was basically just handed to me and said, here you go, run the sport leadership track for our doctorate program. If you want to add classes, great. If you want to add programs, great. It's yours, run it. And so when I got here, it was essentially there were 2 classes that I was teaching. But now we've expanded that. And so, we have the sport leadership doctorate, just starting this year. Now we have a master's in athletic administration and coaching. I run certificate programs in sport leadership at both the graduate and undergraduate level. We've introduced, I think, 8 new courses in the realm of sport leadership. And so I work with, I teach in our undergraduate program. So I've got these random classes. I teach the HPE content to elementary ed teachers, right? So, every fall I'm in a class with 40 future elementary education teachers, and I've got that all the way up to, our doctoral folks who currently work in AD offices at the collegiate level. We've got high school superintendents, we've got student, I mean, all over, and I love it. I mean, I just love it. And so, like I said, I've had an opportunity to move from job to job, but it's been sport leadership since day one, right? I mean, since I was a 6-year-old sitting at my dad's feet while dad's hollering at his football kids, right, on film days. I mean, I've been doing this now for over 40 years, and I just love every day of it.
It's just so cool to hear, that, the number one, the path. And again, you talked about, linear path. I don't know if it was linear, but it certainly one thing led to another. Shout out to Todd Olson. You talk about sitting at committees. Todd and I were on certification at the same time, literally sitting next to each other. Oh, hey, how you doing? And just one of my good NIAAA friends from North Dakota. Uh, we'll do this at the end of the podcast, but I guess two things. If somebody wants to find out more information about the North Dakota degree program, certificate program, or if they just want to call you or reach out to you and bend your ear on all things athletics, what's the best way they can do both of those?
Yeah, our programs are online, und.edu, entirely online. The doctorate and the master's and the certificate programs entirely online. We can get you hooked up that way. If you want specific information, the easiest way is just email me. My work email is mark.a.rerick, Rerick, at und.edu. I've got advisees, like I said, all over the place. I've got, collegiate ADs, down to students who just finished their undergrad and are starting masters and all four corners. I mean, we've got advisees out in the Massachusetts area. I've got advisees down in the Arizona area. I've got students from California. We're all over the place. So yeah, I love to work with anybody. Can pretty much guarantee if you come in, I'm probably going to be your advisor because seems like I'm everybody's advisor in the sport leadership world. But we're just so excited about it. And while I'm plugging here, Jake, I mean, one of the things that I intentionally did specifically with our master's program was make it about the leadership aspects of being an athletic administrator. There are sport management programs all over the place. And I was very intentional in designing our coursework and designing our program not to focus on the management pieces. We don't spend a whole lot of time, talking about, things like promotions and facilities and things like that. I mean, our focus is in the leadership aspects, and we work on ethical leadership and we work on philosophical leadership and historical significance, and things like that. And so we've tried to differentiate our program from the many sport management programs that are out there, to be a little bit different. We focus a lot on leading people, instead of so much managing stuff. So I appreciate that plug in and that opportunity for me to talk about it because we'd love to continue growing our programs here.
Oh no, absolutely, and I think that's a an important distinction to make. And it's not a right, wrong, good or bad, but as you said, a different approach. And
Yep.
I think I think it might be kind of a subtle or maybe not so subtle theme with the NIAAA is, are you a manager or are you a leader? Because I think there's the distinctive skill sets. Great stuff. We're going to go and take another break, but we are coming back for more with our guest, Dr. Mark Rerick. Please stay with us. This is the Educational AD Podcast. We want to say thanks to our good friends at Hometown for their support of the podcast. Hometown is still changing the game with their suite of solutions that include things like, well, big surprise, digital ticketing. They're still the number one digital ticketing supplier for schools and colleges. But how about athletic website construction, fee-free fundraising, and a whole lot more? Whether you're an athletic director, principal, even a head coach, Hometown is going to show you how to save time, how to raise more money, and how to bring your community together. That's hometown.com. littletown.com. Check them out today. We also want to say thank you to our good friends at Vital Signs Wall of Fame. If you're looking for a really cool way to show off your school record boards for all the teams, for all the different events, or show off your school's Hall of Fame, go to Vital Signs Wall of Fame and check out their interactive touch screen. That's right, touch screen video consoles. You put one of their units in your gym lobby or your main school hallway, it's going to be like a magnet for kids, for coaches. How about sponsors? The website is vitalsignswalloffame.com. Check them out today. We also want to say thank you to Gipper. Go to Gipper.com and let their team turn you into a social media marketing guru. Whether it's a small social media post to celebrate a victory or an entire newsletter to showcase all the great things your department is doing, the team at Gipper is going to have you up and running in no time. It's professional graphic design made easy. Go to Gipper.com for more information. And as always, don't forget to mention the podcast. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Educational AD podcast. Um, as Mark shared in that last segment, a tremendous depth of experience as a coach, as an athletic director, as an assistant principal, and now at the college level. He and I actually shared a little bit about our own experiences as head football coaches at small schools and how I think eerily similar paths to helping develop those teams, but. Mark's also very well known, very well respected in the podcast world. He and a team that came together. He's going to tell you how. I think we're at the cutting edge. I dare say the first ones to come out with an athletic director slant within a podcast, and it all was back during COVID. So, Mark, I'm going to ask you to take us back. I guess 5-6 years ago. It's the middle of COVID. How did the off-duty ADs happen?
Yeah, and actually, we were way pre-COVID. We were in mid-catalog by the time COVID hit, so we started quite a long time before that. It really kind of informally started winter of December 16. So the national conference in December of 16. Ryan Walker from Ohio and I were both brand new members to the NIAAA's Publications Committee. And so, you become new on the committee and you kind of connect with the other new people right away. And so that was when Ryan and I started talking and didn't really talk. Mike Hughes is our third partner, Mike from Colorado. And we didn't talk a whole lot to Mike then because Mike was just another face on this committee, right? Ryan and I know that we were new, and so we had that meeting in December. What happened was we got into the summer meeting for publications, which takes place out in Indianapolis, and so kind of June, July of 2017. And we have our initial meeting. The group comes in and you meet, and then you go out to eat as a group, and then your night's over. And so we had the meal with the committee, and probably shouldn't say this live, but what happened was the committee left, and you look around, and it's Mike and Ryan and I settling up to the bar, right? Because we're done eating at 7 o'clock or whatever it is, and so I said, well, we're gonna have a couple beers, and so the three of us then were kind of sitting, and this is when we kind of got to know each other a little bit. First time we're talking. Of course, Ryan and I were new to the committee, so we didn't know any better. Mike was so excited that somebody was sticking around to have a beer with him afterwards, and so we started talking then, and then this is where those coincidences line up again. I mean, Ryan and Mike and I, again, this was summer of 17. We were all avid podcast listeners, right? I mean, we all had various, podcasts that we would listen to, and we were kind of started talking about that. And kind of early in the conversation, we mentioned, there's nothing out there for athletic directors. You can't find anything for athletic directors. It was just kind of a passing comment, right? Well, then what happens is, you have a couple beers, and throughout the night, then of course, like all athletic directors do, we started talking shop. right? And so of course, you're just complaining about this and complaining about that and complaining, right? And finding all of that same common ground that we all do as ADs, right? I can complain about what's going on in North Dakota, and you find out it's the exact same complaints that Ryan is dealing with in Ohio. It's the exact same stuff that Mike is dealing with in Colorado. And we started joking that night about how we should start our own podcast. And the initial joke was, we're going to call it the Three Beers In ADs. And we're just going to complain about stuff that happened, right? Just as a means of letting other ADs know you're not alone, right? We're all dealing with the same stuff. And you can listen to these three idiots complain about their jobs and, whatever else, right? So, kind of throughout the course of the rest of that year, sanity prevailed, thankfully, and we all said, that sounds like a really good way for us to get fired if we were to actually do it that way. But by winter of 17, we came back for a national conference, and the idea still hadn't died. And so then the three of us in the winter AD conference in 17 talked about it a little bit more, kind of started organizing it. And then in May, it was May of 2018 that our first episode came out. And actually, what we had done, the three of us tried to find a middle point, and Omaha was about as close as middle as it got. And of course, pre-COVID, so Zoom wasn't the thing. We were aware of Google Meet was kind of there a little bit. We were aware of some of these platforms, but of course not well versed in it at all. So didn't quite know how it would work to do multiple people. So we said, well, let's do the first ones together. And so, we found a weekend, I think in late March of 2018, maybe early April, and the three of us met in Omaha and had microphones. I had a little soundboard, right? We kind of had a basic script, and we got a place for the weekend, and I can't remember how many episodes. I think we recorded 5 episodes that first weekend. And then in the meantime, we kind of figured, well, we'll figure out Google Meet. And at that time, it wasn't quite as user friendly. And so we had to do some things to make it work. But from there, turned it into a weekly podcast. And that was kind of the weekend where we said, okay, so the Three Beers In ADs is not a good idea. For job security purposes, I don't think we should go that route. But how about if we call ourselves the off-duty ADs? And, we just say, like, look, we're going to do the podcast just like normal ADs do. It's going to be the equivalent of us hanging around, having a couple beers. In fact, I think in our early intro music, we had the sound of beers cracking in that initial intro. And we said, we're going to talk a little bit of shop. We're going to talk a little bit of actual helpful stuff for ADs. We're going to talk about our own fandom, right? Bring in random things, and that was kind of it. And we did that on a weekly basis. We did that every week for quite a while. Ran into a small pause, I think somewhere around about 2021. By 22, we had another small pause. Brought it back up as a bi-weekly every 2 weeks. And unfortunately now, as excited as I am talking about it, I think that the off-duty ADs has probably run its course at this point. And what we've run into, kind of the basis of our product was, starting with, here are the things that happened to us. Here are the things I'm thinking about. And we kick that around for the benefit of everybody else. Well, now, Ryan has been out of the AD world for, I think about 4 years. He's been the director of operations at his school. I'm now in my 4th year out of the AD world. Mike is getting very, very close to the end of his AD career. And so, we've found that job-related stuff, we don't have a whole lot to talk about anymore. It's really just kind of become, fandom, and so, I think we're probably going to put it to bed. But I can tell you, something that we take a lot of pride about is the volume of high school AD podcasts that are out there right now, because we feel good knowing that we were the first ones out there, and really kind of broke the ice on that, and said, like, look, here's this method for people to get their ideas out there. And we just kind of said, if we're listening to podcasts, there's going to be other people like us listening to podcasts. And so we were able to put our product out there, and then kind of see it grow from there. And the Globetrotting ADs, had their niche, and hanging with the ADs had theirs, and Jake, you've got yours, and Mark out in Utah has his, and the Iowa guys had theirs, right? I mean, I apologize to everybody. I'm forgetting names of podcasts right now, um, but everybody kind of jumped into that world and had their own little corner of their market and their own little thing, and very snobbishly, we like looking back at that and saying we kind of opened the doors for that. Not that it wouldn't have happened without us,
Sure.
but we're certainly excited that we had done that, and had put 2 years of that in prior to COVID. So by the time COVID hit, we felt like old hands at it. I mean, it was just a shift in content for us. So it's been a long time though. We were just talking about that, 7 years, right? 7 years in the market. It's been a long time.
Well, and again, appreciate you sharing that. I think I don't know that your listenership, if that's a word, probably took off to a degree during COVID because that's people were there wasn't anything else to do and they found these different vehicles. You know, I think the where your podcast, I think, and you and I shared this with you, the people that do podcasts, all those people you named and the ones you didn't name, when I talk to them, I say that you do the podcast that we all want to do because you do such a great job. You've done such a great job for 7 years of talking about the issues that athletic directors face across the country. Dan Talbot has a throwaway line, but it's so great. He goes, you call up an AD and you say, hey, how's it going? If they say, oh, everything's going great, they're lying because there's 17 different things that they're experiencing that you're experiencing. So you talk about the issues, you complained, but you also did a really good job of sharing possible solutions or ways to approach it, some radically different from North Dakota versus Ohio and Colorado. You also covered topics that are timeless in their annoyance to an AD, whether it's budget or parents. I think one of my favorite episodes, and this is hard to, put a finger on, but one you covered, and I'm going to butcher this title, so correct me. Things that parents say to their kids from the bleachers during a game, as if they were, the first time this thing's ever being said, and that they're also going to have an impact on their child's performance, the game's performance. You morphed into, your Mount Rushmore of hundreds of different
Stuff.
sports themed topics and maybe not sports themed topics, but again, stuff that people could always relate to. And yet it was three pros, three guys who had brought their AD lunchbox or let's say toolbox to work every day, and we're still very much enjoying the experience. I say I would have been in a lot of trouble if I would have had to work for a living. I loved my job as a teacher, coach, and AD. Were there things that drove me crazy? Absolutely. Okay, but I love my job, and I think people that listen to your podcast could tell that the love was there. Um, I mean, um, favorite episodes, favorite topics, favorite answers, as long as they don't involve anything soccer related. What really, sticks out for you from those years? And I'm not talking the professional, podcaster of the year stuff. I'm talking, maybe the more humorous, surprising answers that you gave or that your co-hosts gave.
Yeah, it's probably tough to highlight some of those. I mean, I think there are some things, that kind of turned into themes and long running gags. And one of the things that we love bringing up all the time was in episode number one when we were, recording live in Omaha, and still figuring this thing out. And I had figured out how to edit, so I didn't know how to clear out background noise and all of that. And in episode one, you can hear Mike just completely explode a beer, right? In mid episode. I mean, you can hear it exploding, right? And so, we're able to come back to that. Mike's incessant love of Tom Cruise. We can keep coming back to that. But then even the different ways that we approached our jobs becomes so different. Mike and I both have a K-12 education background, where Ryan's background is business. And, Mike and I are able to poke at him constantly about not loving kids, right? Because he's so analytical, right? And he's so grounded in his approach. And Mike's on the other end of the spectrum, right? Michael bend rules for the benefit of kids, right? He just, so we're able to talk about those. We've had slips of the tongue and phrases. The guys poked at me one time because I made a comment that there's nothing south of my office. And I was referring to my office's location in Grand Forks, but I said, there's nothing south of my office. And of course, they both jumped on that to remind me that basically the entire globe is south of my office, right? But it was just a lot of things like that. And, a lot of things that our listeners wouldn't even know, stuff. Mike and Ryan and I text each other nonstop daily. I mean, it's, with the exception of the text group with my brothers, I mean, those two are the texts I send and receive most often. And it's multiple texts every single day. And the number of times that something that was sent via text in midweek that comes up as an inside joke while we're recording, right? I mean, there are times on there where somebody will say something and two of the three of us will be laughing so hard you can't breathe, but it probably made no sense to most of the people who were listening, right? I mean, it's just stuff like that. And all of that really led into, you talk about the people that you work with in this business and all of that. Mike and Ryan and I, we'll hook up on Google Meet just to hang out sometimes, right? Without recording. I mean, just to meet and whatever. And, the three of us went on a spring baseball trip, a spring training baseball trip last year. Hung out in Phoenix for a few days. I mean, just, the opportunity to do some of those things has been an awful lot of fun. And then just on the podcast side of it, and I'm sure you've experienced this also, I have always enjoyed, being at the National Athletic Director Conference and wandering around and having somebody tap your shoulder, right? That you've never met before and has maybe never emailed the show or anything like that. And just be like, hey, are you guys the off-duty ADs? And like, yeah, oh, I love your show, right? That sort of thing. And there's been a couple times out there where I've been talking to people and somebody in the group that we're talking to has said, have we met before? Like you sound really, really familiar, right? And then I can say, oh, do you listen to the off-duty ADs? Oh my God, that's it. That's where you're at, right? So that's the stuff that I will remember very much from, being a part of that podcast.
And again, there's a dozen different paths I want to go down, but we try to be sensitive to our listeners. I am going to ask you this question though, because it just happened. This happened about a month ago. I think when you post your episodes, I think I could be wrong, that you allow for comments, people to make comments. For years, I did not, and I just maybe 2 months ago, I said, what the hell? Let's see what happens. Let's comments. And so on one of the regular interviews, somebody had left a comment. I go, oh wow, I checked it out. So at the start of our guests don't know this, but at the start of every recording, I do a read for all of our sponsors. It takes about 3.5 minutes for me to do the read. And then within the episodes, the interviews, I'll split them up. And so if we do a 1 hour interview, there's about 6, maybe 7 minutes of commercial, banter. This person writes on his comment, goes, I just listened to a couple of your interviews, and while they are very educational, there seems to be an excessive amount of commercial messages much more than actual content. I don't know if you're required to do the commercial shout outs, but you want to be careful to not have more commercial talk than actual content. And I'm just going, well, wait a minute. There's, I get his point. There's commercials. But anyway, I email back. I go, wow, thanks so much for sharing. And I kind of explain what I just did to you. We have about 7 minutes of content. My sponsors do pay for that, and I do appreciate it, but I think we do a pretty good job of sharing stories. Let's get you on the podcast. Okay. It was an AD somewhere. Um, have you ever gotten, one of those, critical comments? I know there's a lot of people out there that say off-duty ADs is great, educational AD podcast is great. I know that, but I think for me, you focus on that one negative thing. Did you ever get any negative comments like that that just drove you crazy?
I don't remember getting those, and I don't know if that's just the advantage of being first to the space, or folks not knowing where they could make the comments. I don't know. We had a handful of emails. What we would get, and we tried to read most of our emails in the episodes. When listeners would take the
Right.
time to
Yeah.
send
You
some
do a good
thoughts,
job with
we
that.
would. Yeah, we would read those out, and we were able to throw your name out a couple times, Jake. But what we would get from people is people disagreeing with our view on stuff sometimes. But that was great because there were times in episodes where the three of us weren't agreeing anyway, and all three of us were open enough to say, like, we don't know if we're doing this job the right way or not. We have no idea, but we're doing it the way that we do it. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, we'll try something else. And so when people would email us those things and say, well, here's what I do instead, hey, great. We'll put that out there too, right? Like we're not pretending to know anything. And
Right.
we really didn't. And Jake, we've been through multiple iterations of what our ad space looks like. Over 7 years, that's transformed multiple times. Some of our earliest episodes include ads of companies that aren't around anymore.
Yep. Mhm.
Some of them have been changed. And when we finished, in our last iteration of sponsorship was just Vital Signs Wall of Fame, who's a part of your group. And so we've always had like multiple versions of those reads. Sometimes it's just been pre and post, sometimes it's been built in the middle, sometimes it's been a part of our live talk. So we were definitely there for all of that same criticism, but fortunate enough to dodge the bullet. So I guess they were saving up for you. We
Yep.
didn't catch that one, I guess.
Well, again, it was just one. I'm sure there's other people are thinking as they listen, oh, geez, I got to fast forward through this commercial here to get to the content. But let's go and take another break. I know that's shocking to our regular listeners, but we are coming back. We could be setting a record here for the longest interview, but it's certainly worth it. Our guest is Dr. Mark Rerick. We'll be back. This is the Educational AD Podcast. We also want to say thank you to Home Campus for their support. Home Campus is one of those platforms you're going to use every single day, whether it's scheduling, rosters, results. Their eligibility and clearance platform alone is a game changer. Go to homecampus.com for more information, and don't forget to tell them you heard about it on the podcast. We'd also like to thank Ohio University and their online masters in athletic administration. Now, I didn't get my master's through the Ohio program, but my assistant athletic director did, along with thousands of others, and it was a great experience. It's very affordable, just 20 months, totally online. And while you're completing your master's degree, you also complete 11 NIAAA leadership training courses at no extra charge. Check out Ohio University and their online masters in athletic administration. And we want to say thanks to Snap Mobile, particularly Snap Raise. If you've ever spent weeks and weeks with a fundraiser and been disappointed in the results, I'm telling you, those days are over. Go to snapraise.com. We used it at our school with tremendous success, and so will you. Go to their website, check out all of their other great platforms. But if you're looking for a fundraiser, you just found it, and it's Snap Raise. Go to snapraise.com to get started. Welcome back, everybody, to the Educational AD podcast. Mark, again, I want to say thanks for coming on today, and thanks for just being, so candid, so free with, your own personal history, your career history, and the things that you have brought to our profession. Um, Here's my question, and maybe using COVID as a timeline, although maybe that's not the best timeline to use. How has our profession changed, let's say in the last 5 or 6 years? Have we gotten better? And where do you think we are headed? You're no longer a building AD, a county AD, but you certainly, I think we can say you have your finger on the pulse of education-based athletics. You know, what's your take on have we changed and where are we going?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's really at the root of a lot of what I do in my programs here at UND, both with future coaches and with future ADs, because I think there's a lot of similarities between the advancers in those two. The first thing that I think about, we can throw out a million different technology pieces, right? But there's so many aspects of our job that have become automated, that have moved online, that have, become shared. I mean, we can throw out a ton of those, right? But like a lot of ADs, I started in the day where calendars were, right, in open paper calendar on your desk that you're, with your pencil and your eraser, and you've got to confirm all of those dates, with your colleague ADs, and phone calls, emails, whatever, for games. And of course, all of that is solved with scheduling software right now, right? I mean, that time has been reduced. And so, I think that's part of it. Is I think how athletic directors spend their time has changed. You're certainly still stuck to, those complaints, and whether it's an email or a text or a phone call or whatever it is, you're kind of rooted to those things. But so many of the management pieces have been automated now through some of this different software. You think back to, I mean, 20 years ago, when you would start in the office, phone calls to your busing company to make sure your buses for the day were lined up, phone calls to confirm officials, phone calls to confirm opponents, right? And all of that is now automated through your system. And so, part of what I talk to our ADs about is, what are you doing with that time? Because you have some extra time, right, that we didn't have before. And, you can use that either talking to people, or you can use that sitting in your office on email. And so I think that's one of the things is, just what are we doing with some of that time? I think the bigger piece of what's going on is, in part because of social media, in part because of all the technology, in larger part because of how young athletes start playing sports now. Everybody in our profession is more knowledgeable to some extent. And when I say our profession, I don't just mean athletic directors. I mean the ADs, I mean the coaches, I mean the parents, I mean the kids, I mean the fans, because the information that used to be hoarded by ADs and coaches is now available for everybody, right? And because youth sports start so young, a lot of our stakeholders are actually in that world. And so, when you think about, youth programs, right? Youth soccer, which, youth organized soccer starting at 4 or 5 years old, right? Or if you're in Grand Forks, it's hockey, right? We're putting all our kids in skates at 5 years old. And, those have to be run by somebody. And the parents are really highly involved in that. And so, by the time we're getting, kids in our programs, whether that's middle school or high school, by the time we're getting them, our parents have worked as coaches and as program coordinators and as, pseudo athletic directors in the youth programs. Now they haven't done it in our environment, but they've done the job. And so a lot of them feel knowledgeable to some extent about coaching or about managing or about leading. And so, really how that changes our profession is, first of all, we have to be accepting of the fact that other people know what's going on in our job. Right. And on the very simple example, when I teach coaches here, when I teach the introduction to coaching course here at UND, I'm very blatant with the kids in that class, and I tell them, like, look, when you all started playing sports 20 years ago, your coach was the holder of the knowledge, right? If your basketball coach decided you needed to learn how to play zone defense, your coach was the person who knew that. And so as an athlete, you were dependent on your coach telling you how to play zone defense. Well, now any kid with YouTube can go learn that, right? I mean, they can jump on anywhere and they can learn the ins and outs of that. So our coaches aren't the holders of that information anymore, right? But it is still their job to get the right information to the right people to use at the right time. And I think we as ADs have that same thing. Our parents come to us, and in a lot of cases, parents have already done some of the scheduling. Parents are aware of the headaches of trying to line up volunteer officials, right? Parents are aware of transportation and participation difficulties, and they're aware of all of those things. And I think sometimes the ADs that get in trouble are the ones who try to wall themselves off from that and say, no, I'm the expert, right? I'm the athletic director, so I'm the expert. I have the knowledge. I know what's right or wrong. You're the parent. Your job is to parent, right? And what I tell our folks is that this is not it, right? Like I to some extent, this maybe sounds counterproductive, but I try to tell our folks going into the AD world, anybody can be an AD. I mean, like there's jobs out there everywhere. Like anybody can be an AD, right? The difference is, are you good or are you bad? But understand that everybody can do it. And so, what you're doing in that office isn't the only way, and it's probably not the best way. And we have to accept that as leaders. And we have to be honest and transparent enough when we do something that could have been better to say, here's why I did what I did. Here's what I've learned as a result of doing that. Here's how I'm going to do that better next time. And we've got to do that in partnership with everybody else. And that kind of gets to my last thing is, if you're not working with everybody else, you're already setting yourself up for failure, right? And even at the end of my AD days, when I would go into those meetings with parents, and they're no less contentious now than they were, at the start of my career. But at the start of my career, it was me and the coach on this side of the table, right? Assuming my coach hasn't screwed up, right? Me and the coach on this side of the table, and the kid and the parent on that side of the table. And there was a line somewhere in the middle. And those meetings just consisted of me and the coach explaining why we were doing what we were doing. And this was exactly how it was going to be. Period, full stop, end of story. And we just flat out can't do that now. The parents have been involved. The kids are more knowledgeable now than they've ever been before. And so every one of these types of things has to be more about how can we make this better, right? How can we do this differently? How can we all be involved in these things? And there has to be that level of understanding that everybody is a little aware of what we're doing, right? It's not a secret. We're not working behind a wall of knowledge anymore. Everybody's a little aware. Everybody thinks they know what's going on, and their opinions are valid, right? It's all coming from a different place, but their opinions are valid. And I think that's, kind of the change to our organization. Now, what all of that culminates in, and this is the big philosophical thing that I really try to work with, especially in the K-12 piece, right? If you're in a K-12 athletic director office and you are running your program specifically for the purpose of winning games and hanging banners, you're putting yourself behind the eight ball because we are not in a model that can do that as well as the clubs. We flat out in K-12, we flat out cannot run our model based on winning games and hanging banners. It absolutely has to be a goal. It's got to be. That's part of competition. Kids want to win, the coaches want to win, the parents want to win. I mean, we're all striving for that. But that cannot be the be all end all of our philosophy because we can't do that as well as the clubs. And if we try to say, this is what our programs are rooted in, our programs are rooted in winning, period, and we go head to head with the clubs for that, we're going to advocate for the ending of our own programs. We can't, right? In the K-12 model, we cannot compete with the clubs. So, it's the last kind of thing that I tell our future ADs. If you really strongly believe in being a school athletic director, right? So not a general manager of a minor league team or anything like that. If you really believe in being a K-12 athletic director, a huge chunk of your time has to be allocated towards advocacy of why you exist. here's what our program does better, and here's what our program does differently than the AAU teams down the street, than the private teams down the street, right? Because we just cannot, in a model of simply winning, we can't compete with that. But we can compete with character development. We can compete with, look, we're going to use basketball or football or soccer or volleyball or whatever as a means of making your kid a good person, right? Because that's the one number that hasn't changed. Jake, we can talk about all of the different things that have changed in our profession and changed in sports and youth sports, and we can gripe about all of that. But at the end of the day, 6.7% of high school athletes go on to college sports. And that number has not changed. It has shifted within individual sports, but 6.7%. So if you're in K-12 athletics, and this is what I talk to our ADs about all the time, if you are in K-12 athletics, your program had better cater to 100% of your kids. You cannot run a program that caters to 6.7. That would be the equivalent of our math teachers coming in and saying, look, I'm only going to teach math to the kids who are going to be engineers, and the rest of you don't get to do math things today, right? So I think those are some of the big changes that we've had.
No, again, absolutely spot on. Thanks so much for sharing that. I wanted to jump in here because you took my question right out of my mouth, and thank you for doing that. We 94% of our kids are not going to continue playing at the college level, and yeah, we all as ADs, as coaches, we want to win, but so many programs. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. They I think is focus a little too much on that 6% at the expense of the 94%. And you just did a great job of articulating that challenge. Now I'm going to ask you to get out of this segment and articulate that message. Okay. And I'll cheat a little bit. I was at my last school in Florida, the McClay School, great school. It was a great school before I got there. It's still a great school. I managed not to drive it off the rails while I was the AD. We had great coaches, had great leadership. Best boss I ever had. He's still there. And we had great kids. And our parents were pretty good too. Okay. As a department, this was our athletic department mission. We are going to provide every kid with a great high school athletic experience. I might have left out one word, but that was it. We're going to give them a great experience. And that might be as a starter, as a sub, as a manager, as a fan. Okay. But that was our goal. And we won our share of state championships. We won our share of banners. The school continues to do that. But I think our coaches did a pretty good job of carrying out that mission. But every once in a while, I would have to have a chat with a coach, football coach, big surprise, about, hey, what is our mission? So now I've poisoned your well. How do we articulate that? What's a good way to phrase that and follow through with that message that you had already shared before I opened my mouth?
Yeah, I love it. You're right in my sweet spot here. This is exactly what I've done. And some of the listeners that you have probably heard me speak at the national conference before. I've done a handful of sessions, and all of the sessions that I've done, whether they've been rooted in working with parents, whether they've been rooted in leading coaches, whether they've been rooted in culture change, to me, it always comes back to the core values of your program. And when I talk about core values, and I did this as an AD with my coaches also, right? I don't use core values as a flowery statement to say, here are the things that we believe in that are great, and just do these, because your core values have to be how, right? I mean, and your example was a great one, right? Because you need to have a vision, you need to have a mission. Okay. And those are going to be your big flowery statements. The statement like, we're going to provide everybody a fantastic athletic experience, right? Or however that was worded. Okay. That's a great thing to put on letterheads. It's a great thing to hang up above the wall. It's all that, right? My first question would be, how? How are we going to do that? And for me, this all comes back to, and I've had this quote in probably every presentation that I've given in the last 10 years. And it comes from a guy named Mitchell Resnick, who runs an MIT Learning Center or whatever. But his quote is, assess the things you value, don't value the things that are easiest to assess. And so here's what happens in athletics. We have this flowery mission, and we say things like, and I'll go one step farther than your school, Jake, right? We'll have things like, our extracurricular program is about the whole child, right? We're gonna build our kids, socially and academically and character and whatever, right? But if you're not assessing that, if you don't have specific goals and specific ways of meeting those goals, right? So this is assessing what you value. You probably do value turning kids into fully functioning adults. And that's what I always say. That's what our extracurricular programs are for. It's a part of turning kids into fully functioning adults. And we understand that that's the character stuff that sport can teach. But if you're not intentionally teaching it and you're not intentionally assessing it, right? Assessing the things you value, what's going to happen is everybody's going to value the things that are easiest to assess. Well, in sports, what's the easiest thing to assess? It's the scoreboard, right? If you're not telling people what your program is for and what your program is going to do, folks are going to assess the scoreboard. And the people within your program are going to assess playing time because that's easy. I know how many minutes my kid played tonight. So if you're not telling me exactly what you are teaching my kid, I'm going to assume that the point of his great athletic experience is that he gets to play basketball that night. Well, then when I show up on game night and he's not playing, well, that's a pretty crappy athletic experience for my kid, right? And so as coaches and athletic directors, we have to be able to say, here are the things we focus on, and here's how we do it. Right. So the basic example that I have given, as I've spoken at coaches clinics and coaches conventions and our coaches candidates here, I love to talk about rebounding, specifically rebounding. Right. Every basketball coach in America teaches their kids rebounding because rebounding is an important part of winning a basketball game. You have to be able to rebound, right? But when you are done playing basketball, whether that's in the eighth grade or the 10th grade or the 12th grade, right? When you are done playing basketball, rebounding is a skill you're never, ever, ever going to use again. Okay. Even if you play old man rec basketball, nobody boxes out in old man rec basketball, right? Nobody. You might bang your body into somebody to grab a board. Most likely the shot goes up, you're going back on defense. So rebounding is never a skill. So as a coach, if you are teaching rebounding for the sake of rebounding, you are teaching kids a skill that is dead to them by 18 years old. However, if you are teaching rebounding for the sake of being persistent and being tenacious, now you are providing them skills that go on. Now, what it's up to the coach is, how do we assess that? Right? Because we can't assess it by saying you grabbed a rebound or you didn't grab a rebound. We've got to come up with some assessment manager that says, I love how persistent you were in grabbing that one, right? And we can do this through film study. We can do this through observation. And so, as you're setting goals for your students, then it doesn't become, hey, I need you to grab 5 rebounds tonight. Because you could be the world's worst boxer outer guy and still get 5 rebounds if the ball lands to you or if you're 6'9" or whatever, right? So we're not going to assess how many rebounds you grab. When we watch film tomorrow, we're going to assess how persistent were you in the pursuit of that rebound? How tenacious were you in the pursuit of that rebound? How disciplined were you in the pursuit of that rebound? And we have to actually assess those things, right? So, that's the language that I give my folks is don't just talk about all these fantastic things you're going to do for kids. Tell people this is exactly how I'm going to teach your kid these good character traits.
Wow, great stuff. There's a master class right there. Okay.
There's my soapbox.
Yeah. No, I love it. It's great stuff. This could go on for even more hours, but we are going to wrap things up with our athletic director toolbox, which, again, for our listeners, Dr. Mark Rerick, certified master athletic administrator, did a couple of years ago in our second edition. His comments coming up soon are going to be in our fourth edition, which is coming out in November. Let's go and take our final break here from Athletic Surveys. And when we return, we're going to see what 3 tools, in addition to all the other wisdom he shared today, what 3 tools are going to go into Mark Rerick's AD Toolbox. This is the Educational AD Podcast. We want to say thanks to Athletic Surveys for sponsoring the AD Toolbox segment. In my school, we use surveys for just about everything, for our student athletes, for our coaches, even for our parents. And here's the cool thing. The information that came back, almost always over the top positive. We still heard from our squeaky wheel parents, but the surveys allowed us to hear their concerns, usually deal with them before they turned into something big. But having all of that positive data was incredibly valuable, especially when you're visiting with a frustrated parent, or maybe with your principal, or sometimes even your school board. Go to athleticsurveys.com. They're going to create a custom survey that lets you take the pulse of everybody in your program. That's athletic surveys. And don't forget to mention the podcast. Well, it's that time of the podcast. We've just finished a long visit, a great visit with our good friend, Dr. Mark Rerick. If you've been paying attention, Mark's the assistant professor at the University of North Dakota in their sport leadership and athletic administration and coaching degree programs. Longtime athletic director and coach, still very involved at the national level, NIAAA. Great speaker. Bring him to your school, bring him to your program. But right now, I'm going to task him with sending out a brand new AED, something he's probably a little bit familiar with, on their very first job. But I'm only going to let him put 3 tools in the toolbox. Now, he did this a few years ago in our second edition of the toolbox. These tools that he's going to share are actually going to be part of our 4th edition of the Athletic Director's Toolbox. That's going to be coming out November 17th. So, Mark, I'm going to shut up. What 3 tools are going to go into this edition of the Athletic Director Toolbox?
Yeah, I feel enclosed by this three only rule. As you've learned here, English teachers like we like throwing words around, and so three seems hampering. I'm going to stay fairly close to my first set with you for a couple of them, but my 3 tools now are very much informed by my job and my role now in preparing folks for athletic leadership in the future. So the first one is just going to be that kind of all-encompassing professional development, right? Be curious, keep learning, find new ways to do things. In particular, right, stretch your own comfort zone. Go to, there are webinars and online sessions and I mean, there are things everywhere. And I really encourage folks, find some of the ones that you're maybe not interested in, right? Find some of them that you read the title of it and you just disagree with off the jump. But be curious, right? Ted Lasso, be curious. I mean, get in there and just keep learning, right? All knowledge is good knowledge. It's how you use it, right? So that's the first one is professional development. The last 2, and I highlight these for all brand new leaders constantly, right? And it's as a way of keeping your doors open. The first one is, to be transparent in everything we do. Embrace transparency. And what I tell athletic administrators, every decision that you make, whether small, huge, or in between, you have to be able to explain why you made that decision, right? And your reasoning may be off, your reasoning maybe doesn't make any sense, your reasoning might be wrong, but you have to be able to explain how you got from A to B to C to D to E and made this decision. So when somebody questions you and when somebody asks you about it, you are able to say, here's why I did what I did. So transparency on that one. And then the last one, again, in terms of open doors, right? And this is pretty similar to the first group I gave you, Jake, but acceptance, right? Being accepting of the fact that everybody around you loves sports. Everybody around you knows something about sports. Everybody around you has a point of view and a perception of sports, and that's okay, right? The parent who's sitting across from your desk who's hollering at you because they think that you're intentionally harming their kid, right? You know that you aren't intentionally harming their kid, but you also have to accept the fact that that parent is tunnel vision for that kid, right? That parent's not in your office hollering at you, right? Because they think you're a terrible athletic director, even if that's what the parent is saying. That's not why they're hollering at you. They're hollering at you because they're protecting your kid in the best way they know how. And we have to understand that everybody around us is just doing the best they can do, right? Us as an AD, our coaches, our kids, our parents, everybody is doing the best job that they can do with the tools they have available. And we have to accept that, right? And so it doesn't mean you have to agree with the parent. It doesn't mean you have to agree with the coach. It doesn't mean you have to agree with the kid. It doesn't mean you have to agree with your boss, right? Maybe you might have to agree with your boss, but we have to be accepting that the folks around us care about this as much as we care about it as well. So there you go. Always learning, be transparent, right? And have acceptance for others.
Well, again, great stuff. Since you did give us four tools the first time around, I'm going to go ahead and let you throw a fourth tool out there. So I love all of them. No surprise you led with professional development, but what's going to be that fourth bonus tool in your toolbox?
Love your athletes, period. Love your athletes, right? And one of the things that I struggled with the most in my last stop as an athletic director was I had this really close connection to the coaches, and there was some removal between me and the athletes. There was some distance because I wasn't in a building, and it took almost daily reminders for me, to remind myself that my job was the kids, right? The coaches were the conduit to that job. And that's my last thing. It's love your athletes, whatever level you're at. You've got to remember that the programs that you're running are for those athletes. So you've got to love your athletes. You got to love coaching. You got to love your athletes. It's the best way to go about the job.
Wow, great stuff. Mark, one more time. We did this earlier, but let's do it again. If somebody's interested in reaching out, picking your brain just a little bit more, and listeners, I don't have to tell you, you have a tremendous resource here. Or if they want to find out more about the University of North Dakota degree programs, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, you can, the easiest way you can find me on our website, it's und.edu. Upper right, there's a directory link. You can find me there. Just to directly email me at work, it's mark, M-A-R-K, .a.rerick, R-E-R-I-C-K, at und.edu. And I love to help folks out. I've been fortunate enough to do some speaking to various programs. I'll answer any email. I'll help out any way I can. So it's what I'm passionate about. It's what I love doing.
All right. Well, thanks again for sharing with our listeners. Looking forward to seeing you in Tampa here in a couple of months at the NADC, and looking forward to hopefully a couple more episodes of the off-duty ADs coming out. It's been a while since your last release.
It has, and I know we'll have at least one more, and we'll see what happens after that. So I appreciate you having me. Thanks, Jake.
All right. To our listeners, we appreciate you. And just a reminder, we upload the Zoom recordings of every interview to the Educational AD Podcast YouTube channel. We try to do this just about every day with interviews and segments where we share stories along with some best practices. So please come back and join us again for the next episode of the Educational AD Podcast.